We have a reading from Genesis, the first chapter. Then God said, "Let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over the cattle and over all the wild animals of the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So God created humankind in his image. In the image of God, he created them. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
And our second reading is from Psalms, Psalm 8. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. You have set your glory above the heavens. Out of the mouths of babes and infants, you have founded a bulwark because of your foes, to silence the enemy and the avenger. When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars that you have established, what are human beings that you are mindful of them, mortals that you care for them? Yet you have made them a little lower than God, and you have crowned them with glory and honor. You have given them dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under their feet, all sheep and oxen, and also the beasts of the field, the birds of the air and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the seas. O Lord, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. This is the word of our Lord.
Thanks be to God.
In 2012, there was the National Gathering, which is the gathering of high school students in New Orleans. This is a gathering of, about 30,000 of your best friends, and you gathered. One of the speakers there was Yahel Curry, and he spoke of a gumbo soup. He talked about what goes into gumbo to make it so delicious. The beef, the pork, all of the vegetables. You let it simmer and then add the very important spices to give it all the different flavors. He then looked out at this crowd of 30,000 and said, "Look around you and look at the gumbo which God has created." Now, I think of this and I consider this to be a little bit more concise way to speak of America instead of calling America the melting pot of the world. I think of America as this place of the many different people and ideas where we exist together, mixing and producing something new. I like the imagery that gumbo serves. Now, this gumbo, it is only as I took history courses and as I learned more about the Christian church in America and worldwide, and more about the Lutheran denomination. And it was only as I met people who grew up in a different part of Wisconsin than I did, people who did not grow up in Neshkoro, Wisconsin, a town of 300. As I talked to people who grew up in a different part of the country, it's only when I started to hear people's stories and learn about lives that I didn't live, which are many. So when I started to reflect and consider all of these stories and think about this gumbo, which is America, and how America kind of started on this collision with a collision of people who inhabited it. We have original inhabitants, we have Native Americans who lived here, and we have two forms of migration. We have voluntary and forced. How did these three groups of people live together? People who were Jews, who were Muslim, who were Christian. How did the Christians that moved here from whatever country they came from, how did they live the life as Christ's disciples? That which we try to attain. Tonight we're going to look at the abolitionist movement, the movement of people who believed it was important to rid America of the practice of slavery. This movement had the most traction, the most activity from the 1830s to the 60s. There was definitely outliers. There was definitely people who from the very beginning, 1700s, who definitely spoke out against it. The 30s to the 60s is where there was most activity, the most, actually that's oftentimes where the churches really started to have some action. And that action ultimately ended up being people leaving the church. The biggest being in 1842 with the Methodist Church. The Methodist Church had a, I don't know what you want to call it, a belief, a very strong belief. And what happened was people left the church because while this church, the Methodist Church, condemned buying and selling humans, people at all levels in the church were slaveholders. That's not to say that everyone was. What it is to say is that slaveholders, people who had slaves, were Christians, were parishioners, were pastors, and were bishops. People belonged to a church which condemned an act, yet people in the church basically kind of turned a blind eye to it. Now, the Lutheran Church is very interesting, primarily because there's not a whole lot there to talk about. It believed that slavery was a secular question, but there's two important, maybe interesting aspects, I think, that kind of are part of this. In 1837, there was a group in Western New York that broke away called the Frankian Synod. Now, in Walworth County, Wisconsin, there's a town called Sharon. This town was established, people emigrated there from Western New York. And the Lutheran Church that was established there was established under the Frankian Synod. The church followed the bylaws. The other piece that I think is interesting with this Frankian Synod, which is the Lutheran Synod, is, if you want to hit the screen, is that they had a very strong parameters as to who would be a pastor or a bishop. No minister who was a slaveholder. No, nothing at all. Absolutely put it right there. The 1848 went further to the parameters were expanded to lay persons. If a person had said and owned a slave, they were not to be part of this community. These parameters are quite specific. There's not much leeway. There's not much black or white or gray, really. Not much gray at all in there. Now, I just gave you a bunch of facts, figures, a bunch of information about church history, Lutheran church history, Christian church history. Why? And why particularly this topic? Why chattel slavery? Let's face it, we as humanity, we are a sinful people. We can talk about any number of sins that we do. We could talk about gossiping, lying, cheating, judging. Why didn't any church set parameters around one of these sins? Such strict parameters. because people were being stripped of their human dignity. Because it wasn't a matter of one sin being worse than another. It wasn't a matter of a person was wronged. It was a matter of human rights. It was a matter of a person being stripped of the belief and the knowledge that they are made in God's image. We're going to explore this in more discussion after worship. I invite you all to join us. Right after worship, we'll gather downstairs. And we will continue our time together. Please stand as you are comfortable.